Nicodemus comes to Jesus. So here's a religious teacher. He's at the top of the heap. He has no one to go to. He knew everything. He had everything. He's at the top of the social status. The history says he was one of the 3 wealthiest people in all of Jerusalem, which that's saying something at that time. He was very wealthy. When Jesus was crucified, he brought 75 pounds of embalming spices, Nicodemus did, which is like a fortune. 75 pounds of embalming spices he brought when Christ was crucified. So Nicodemus, they believe, came around and actually believed that Jesus was who he said he was. But Nicodemus right now, he's riveted. Nicodemus has done everything is right his whole life. Nicodemus has lived by the strictest order of the law. He's at the top of the pecking order. He's wealthy, he's successful, he's influential, but he's empty. He's empty, and he knew it. He knew he was empty. He saw something in Jesus that he'd never seen before. The Bible says that he saw the miracles that Jesus did, and he came to him. Why? Because the Pharisees, they believed in miracles. They believed in the supernatural. They believed in the prophetic signs. These are the ones who were always asking for the sign. It wasn't the Sadducees that were asking for the sign. It was the Pharisees that were asking for the sign because they believed in that, right? And so Nicodemus saw the miracles, and he's like, I've only talked about miracles. I've never seen them. There's something going on here that I don't know. And so he goes to Jesus by night. Why did he go by night? Anybody want to guess on that one? He didn't want anybody to see him, right? Didn't want anybody to see him. But he went. He went, right? He did go. Others didn't, but Jesus did go, or Nicodemus did go. And so he comes to Jesus, and he says 2 different things. So the first thing he says, Rabbi. So the idea of a teacher calling another teacher rabbi, it's a position of submission. So Nicodemus doesn't call anybody rabbi. He is the rabbi. He doesn't go to anybody for questions. He knows everything, right? And so when he goes to Jesus, he is saying rabbi, which is to say, teacher, my teacher. That's what it meant. The one who teaches me, rabbi. I've come to be taught of you. I've come to listen of you. And he says, we know that you are a teacher. He uses another word, diadaskalos. Diadaskalos means to bring forth. So you see, Jesus didn't just teach, he brought it forth. There's a difference between teaching and manifesting what you're talking about. There's a big difference. You can tell me you know how to work on a car, but then show me. Now that's diadaskalos. You can show me what you know. You can demonstrate what you know. And so he said, we know that you are a rabbi. So the one who I come to you to be taught, we know that what you bring forth is not of man. We know this is something completely different. And he says, because no one can do what you can do without God being with them. And so Jesus said, truth. He says, you come to me to be taught? Let me teach you. You come to me seeking truth? See, here's again, this is a principle in activation right here. Say it with me, honor creates access. So Nicodemus is honoring Jesus as a teacher. And because he honors Jesus as a teacher, Jesus hears the honor. Oh, you want me to teach you? Do you know how many people talk to Jesus and he didn't teach them anything? Because they didn't honor him. They came to him with bold declarations or anything, and he answered their nonsensical questions because they didn't come to him with an open heart. He's about to give Nicodemus the key to the kingdom. This is the one most illuminated chapters in the whole Bible, and it was spoken to one man. And the reason it's so illuminated is because Nicodemus honored the Lord, and God brought access to Nicodemus through the honor that he paid him. He said, you're gonna honor me? And he said, then I'll teach you truth, I say. You must be born again. And he says, unless you're born again, you cannot see the kingdom of heaven. And Nicodemus says, what do you mean? Can I enter my mother's womb the second time? Ladies, you should be glad about that. You should be like, oh my gosh, I got to give birth to this child again. And Jesus, what he's really doing is he's showing how far away he's removed from spiritual understanding. Jesus just gave him he just spoke spiritually to him and spoke prophetically to him and spoke illuminating revelation to him. And Nicodemus couldn't get it because his whole perspective was earthly. His whole perspective was rational. You understand that? Church is that way. Our modern American church, we have moved so far away from kingdom and power, which is what we're supposed to manifest. We're supposed to bring the kingdom, the power, and the glory of the Lord to the world. This is what we're supposed to do. This is how this is supposed to work. But what we do is we try to bring rational understanding, and we're not even really doing that. We're cheerleaders, right? This is kind of like what ends up happening. We're not really even teaching what is true. And so he says, so Nicodemus, he says, what are you talking about? This is basically what he said. Jesus said, you must be born again. And he said, or you will not see the kingdom of heaven. And Nicodemus's question is, what are you talking about? And so Jesus gives him a hint. And the hint is 5 and 6. He says, say it with me, unless you are born of the water and the Spirit. What was he referencing? Jesus was speaking Old Testament language. He was speaking to Nicodemus in the manner in which Nicodemus would understand. Nicodemus was an Old Testament master. Nicodemus would have understand the prophetic. Throw that up there. Throw up Ezekiel 36. This is what he was saying. He says, then I will sprinkle clean water on you. So here's Nicodemus. Nicodemus would have known Ezekiel. Nicodemus would have known Isaiah. Nicodemus would have known Jeremiah. Nicodemus would have known Daniel. He would have known Micah. He would have known Zephaniah. He would have known Zechariah. He would have known all of the prophets. And so he's saying, what are you talking about, Jesus? And Jesus says, I'm talking about this. I will sprinkle clean water on you and you will be clean. This was written hundreds of years before Jesus ever came. And I will cleanse you from all of your filthiness of your idols. And I will put a new heart in you and a new spirit in you. And I will take the heart of stone and I will give you a heart of flesh, which means a heart that's alive. And a heart that can't feel anything, and I'll make you alive. Anybody born again here? You know what I'm talking about, right? Come on. I will put my spirit within you and I would cause you to walk in my statutes. You will keep my judgments and walk in them. He was holding Nicodemus accountable. In other words, you should know this, dude. This shouldn't be a mystery to you. So when people do this chapter on John chapter 3, they think that Jesus is just speaking in this like cryptic, like far out, man. Like he's kind of speaking in this Zen way to just blow people's minds. That's not what he's doing here at all. He's speaking Old Testament back to the person who should understand it. He should have known this, and he didn't. And that's the problem. And so Jesus, and he does know it, because you'll see that he did know what Jesus was talking about, but he couldn't understand exactly how this was all going to happen. And then Jesus said, you shouldn't marvel at this. Flesh begets flesh. So again, this is where he's speaking to them. If you were a Jew in that culture, anytime they used the word flesh, it always related to corruption. So to the Jew, they knew that wherever the corruption was with man, it was in his flesh. And that's why the Jews had to do sacrifices all the time, because they knew their flesh was corrupt. So they had to make sacrifices to make atonement or to account for their stupid fleshly mistakes. They made sacrifices on feast days, but they also had to do sin offerings. They had to constantly offer offerings for sin because they knew that the corruption was in the flesh. So what Jesus is telling him is, he's like, why are you freaked out? Why do you marvel at this? The only thing you're going to get from flesh is more corruption. Say it with me, flesh cannot give birth to spirit. This is what he's telling him. What he's illuminating it to trying to get him on page with is, this is a supernatural act, Nicodemus. This isn't something that you work for. The guy's whole life was work, do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. This is an indictment on every human religion on the planet. Every human religion's based on works. It's the first thing he's telling him. You can't work for this. Second thing he's telling him is, he's saying you must be born again. These people, they thought they were justified because of who their ancestor was. And Jesus is telling them the sum total of your entire religious system produces zero. Nothing. That's what he's telling them. Everything that you've built, everything that you believe, everything that you are is zero. You hear me all the time say, do you want the first step of the kingdom? You know nothing. You know nothing. He's telling a guy who's spent his whole life learning, you know nothing. You don't know anything. You act like you do, but you truly don't. And you're being exposed right now that you don't really understand this kingdom.